This is Growth Guide, a podcast exploring the depths of curiosity, questioning everything in the name of growth. I'm your host, Brian D'Alessandro. Matthew Tunney is CEO and founder of NGON Solutions, a company helping the oil industry operate more efficiently and to improve environmental performance. Now, the oil industry and Bitcoin seem pretty disparate, but NGON is changing that in a really cool way by capturing excess gas before it's flared and converting it on site to usable energy, which they then use to mine Bitcoin. After gaining a PhD in theoretical physics from Cambridge University, Dr. Tunney spent the last 15 years working and trading in the financial and energy industries. Utilizing his experience in corporate structuring and trading throughout a successful banking career, he later leveraged his technical mathematical background and experience trading volatile and illiquid commodities through several market cycles. Now, he's entering into the blockchain industry where he sees significant growth and wealth creation opportunities. We discuss how Matt has stepped into the role of entrepreneur to innovate on how the oil industry operates. His approach improves on existing methods that consider the impact of the environment. We cover how over time he has converted skeptics and his vision for a greener future. Hey, Matt, thanks so much for joining today.
Thanks, Brian. Nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. I've been really blown away by your story and what you're doing, and I'm super excited to get into this today. In the world of innovation, I think what you're doing is really pushing the edge. So why don't we start by just you giving an overview of the work you're doing?
Yeah, sure. So for the last year or so, our main focus right now is to help oil producers with their ESG, their environmental responsibility. And so we go out, and a lot of producers have this waste product. You might have seen flare towers or pictures of these towers that have a big flame at the top of them. So we go out and we capture that kind of wasted product that's polluting the atmosphere, and we do something useful with it. So we convert it to power, and we use it in data centers, actually for Bitcoin on the site. And so effectively, we're capturing their waste and then converting it to something useful that we can use in different contexts around.
Which really hits on, both ends of that spectrum, right? Because Bitcoin has gotten a lot of flack about its carbon footprint for mining. And obviously the gas industry has its issues there. And just to go on, so the flaring that happens, that's just a natural byproduct when drilling for oil happens, just to be clear?
Yeah. And so especially with the new type and shale drilling these days, that gas, when you go into an oil well, there's a mixture of oil and gas in almost every well you do. And depending on the particular well, it can be a lot more oil and a little bit of gas, or vice versa. If there isn't very much gas, what happens is the oil infrastructure is built out, because that's where the profit and the volume lies. And this gas gets kind of wasted. But what we're trying to create is responsible oil drilling, where just because it's profitable to mine for oil doesn't mean we should be able to pollute. We being the generic industry, we shouldn't be able to pollute into the atmosphere. And so what our process does is really try and integrate as a service into that industry to say, hey, there's more responsible things we can do with some of these byproducts, and we should be aware of it, because we want to have a good carbon footprint if we're using oil. And so that's kind of where we've been focused, and we've been getting a lot of good traction lately. I think the regulation and the funding in globally is starting to catch up with this idea of being responsible, and not just reducing your carbon footprint by planting trees, which is a great thing as well, but also by kind of creating those processes through the whole chain of the industry together.
Yeah, would you say that just from government mandates and just the change of environmental focus, that this has really become a large area of focus for the oil industry?
Yeah, I think it is. People are aware of it, and the oil industry wants to start to give back. I think in terms of particulars, one of the areas that there are two main mechanisms that can happen to force the issue. One is a regulatory effect where the laws and what you're allowed to do simply change. And so everybody's forced to find a solution. We're not quite there yet. There's concern and there's recommendations and goals and 10-year out targets. The other way that, and this is what I think is happening right now in the market, is that investors and generic investors from a macro viewpoint, whether that's funds or pension funds or retail, they want to be responsible in their investment. And so one of the mechanisms to force an industry to behave responsibly is that the cost of capital in that industry goes up. And so what we're finding is that there's a higher cost of capital if a company isn't being responsible. And so one of the benefits we have at the corporate level for some of these oil companies is that we help their footprint in the ESG space. So it's beneficial to them. And that's really what is catching up faster than the regulatory angle. This is all new, and people don't really know how it will affect, what the knock-on will be. The technology is fairly new, and so everybody moves slowly to be cautious and make sure they're doing the right thing. And those are the two dynamics at play that we kind of tend to see.
And then the other part of this equation that's really interesting is the fact that you're mining Bitcoin, which, when I think of the oil industry, I see a big gap between, that image of in my head of the oil industry and Bitcoin. So what has the response been by investors and your colleagues in the industry in regards to Bitcoin?
Really interesting question. 12 to 15 months ago, the response was a bit of a laugh, and sure, I think somebody at one time used the term, we're not sure you guys will be able to wave a magic wand and make this disappear. Someone who's been in the Bitcoin space for a few years now, and to me, it's a really exciting space. The technology is huge. The kind of non-government dependency, the cross-border is big, but I also look at Bitcoin as a commodity because it's an asset class that you can allocate to. It's produced out of the ground. It has certain really nice properties that aren't like normal commodities, so no cost to transport and no cost to store. And so once you start putting Bitcoin in that framework, right, and explaining how its value comes around and what it's really being generated from, people start to come into the idea of, okay, this is actually just another commodity, but it's a new age. It's a very good technology. And then they do more research on it and kind of open up to the idea, okay, this is actually a useful mechanism, right? They always have a lot more questions. But I think the responses in general, they like the idea and the concept. Everybody's very cautious. And, one of the big things in Bitcoin is regulation. What happens when it becomes more regulated? Mm-hmm. This is great for us because more regulation means it's more adopted. It's on more corporate companies' balance sheets. It's viewed as a real instrument as opposed to a niche or, side instrument. And so there's a lot of momentum moving through, just the general world right now about Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies. And that has helped people, from the oil industry, from the crypto industry, and just general investment industry also be open to this idea, which is incredibly fast moving, but incredibly exciting to be involved in it.
And was the selection of Bitcoin because it is that leader and it is so established and being accepted for its, place in the market, and the fact that it is much more stable and, just widely adopted?
Combination of those things. And then, part of my background is in finance and financial aspects of assets. So we look at, there's obviously the operational point of what's, requires low maintenance and is easy to scale. part of our business and really penetrating the oil and gas market is for scale. And so we need something that is good to do that with. And Bitcoin's a prime candidate from an operational point of view. But when in general, when you look at Bitcoin as a commodity, people talk about store of value in the market all the time, and they compare it to gold. And one of the factors between metals and say Bitcoin versus other cryptocurrencies or some other cryptocurrencies is this idea that it costs a lot of money or energy, in this case, to replicate a Bitcoin. That's what gives it part of its value and part of its security. And so we look at, corporates and what gives people security and confidence. Well, all of these factors go into, what's the main market cap exposure, what's backed by significant energy use that has a large cost to replicate, just like gold. So you put all those factors in really Bitcoin's the only one that checks all of those boxes to do it on scale.
And then I guess when you compare to gold, there's a few other things. The blockchain aspect of it is really interesting. I'm sure the people that you spoke to, 12 to 16 months ago, you're talking about Bitcoin valued at somewhere like 20 grand. And now, while it's on a dip, it's still at 60 grand. How much does the expected appreciation of Bitcoin play into your model? Or is that just like gravy on top?
So in our actual model, it doesn't at all, because we would rather be conservative. We do use an accumulation-based model depending on the pricing. But, one of the questions we keep getting asked is, but Bitcoin's done in 15 years, like Bitcoin's done in 10 years. And it's not quite like that. You would hope transaction fees to process this existing ledger comes in. But I believe that that appreciation, again, going back to thinking about Bitcoin as a commodity, is prices are always determined by supply and demand. And so when you look at the mechanisms that are in Bitcoin per se, with its decreasing supply but increasing demand, that plays into the longevity of not only returns and kind of profit for our business, and which means we can scale out more and be more aggressive in curtailing that ESG, but it also means the business, I think, has a longer it has a longer time frame than just Bitcoin at 60,000. We get higher, and as we get higher and higher, our business will be a lot longer.
Yeah, it's a funny thing for any entrepreneur, especially innovating in a space when somebody's got a concern 15 years down the road. It's like, if that's your biggest concern, I think we're okay, because a lot's going to evolve throughout that period of time. So, and I just want to clarify, when you say, Bitcoin's done in 15 years, what you mean is that there's a finite amount of Bitcoins that can be mined, and it's expected that all of them will be mined by then?
Yeah, and I was kind of paraphrasing what we get asked.
Yeah, absolutely. Just for listeners, I'm just, making sure they're aware. It's not like Bitcoin stops after that. And hopefully it'll become more of a trade.
Yes, and a miner, essentially a Bitcoin miner, gets paid for contributing computational power to the network. And currently that payment is in, it was called a mining reward, and a tiny little transaction fee. And that once all the Bitcoin have been produced, that mining reward goes away, but the transaction fee stays.
Oh, interesting.
The network continues. The miners will still be incentivized in some way. Being a lowest cost miner at that point is very important. But yeah, everything will still continue. The incentives just change.
And I imagine the whole crypto world is so quickly evolving. There are other opportunities you guys might see down the road where you can plug this platform into, or evolve this platform and apply it to other areas, right?
I think so, yeah. And one of the most interesting things that we're working on right now is seeing, because what we do, as well as the service angle to the producers, we really are looking into how to quantify the carbon emission that we reduce, because we process and use some of the fuel. to do this. And so we're looking at, can we become a producer of carbon credits, which we can then, really start to affect incentives for, cleaner oil or carbon offset oil, or, lots of things in the world that we can get around. I mean, one of the nicest things that we've, just talking about Bitcoin as a currency now instead of a commodity, is that when we take this gas, we essentially create a digital marketplace for it at the wellhead. So once it's converted into Bitcoin, we can take that Bitcoin in its electronic in form. So we can take it from, a West Texas polluting area and do something. We can plant those trees. We can put it on clean water in India, just because it's a very clean transfer of money. And so Bitcoin, with all its properties, which, could be any cryptocurrency that we can use the same module with, can be used then globally. And so I think that will develop over the next few years as we start to see people really get on board with what they can do.
Yeah, that's really cool. And it's really leveraging one of the unique aspects of Bitcoin in this decentralized network. So you're able to just deploy in localized areas and make that effect at a very cost effective and environmentally friendly way. That's really neat.
Yeah, we got to get there. We're trying to do it, and it's all about creating, I think, the knowledge and the awareness to do this. And there's operating the business, there's making profit, and then there's really using it for good in the world and to drive home that messaging. And I think that's where our business is going over the next kind of 6 months as we build out that operational piece. We really want to focus on what good we can do with this.
So, what was the impetus? What was the inspiration for this business? Because it seems so revolutionary.
Well, it's funny. We wouldn't class it as revolutionary in art. It's really just about the focus and the idea. And just to be honest, the idea came from, how do we become a low cost producer of Bitcoin? Where can we look at solar? Can we look at wind? Can we look at all these different ventures? And when we looked at we look at things from a balance sheet and a treasury management point of view, and how long those investments take to return. And this fuel gas, or flare gas, as we got, it really, we're not the first people to use natural gas in power generators, right? It's been around for a long period of time. It's just really, I think, our backgrounds and the management team we have, which have been fantastic so far. We have E&P experience, we have traders on the background, and then we have an operational team. But the whole kind of getting everybody together, and the impetus being something we believe in, something we know about, and an area that really requires expertise in 2 or 3 different segments to build that together. Something we just we were very passionate about pursuing. And the more we learn about it, and the more we learn how much it's needed, the more, happier we've become as we're succeeding to roll it out. But no one idea. It wasn't it was just a progression of, this is the right thing to do.
And now that you have this formed and have a good sense of the direction it's going, you talk about this passion you have for it and this unified belief. How do you define that? What is that exactly? Is it about, making a positive impact on the planet, or is it about taking an old industry and evolving it?
It's a really great question. And I have not one I've been asked or thought of before. I honestly think that building a business around revenue and investment and returns is great. And it's a fiduciary responsibility that we feel to, my money, or our investors' money, and the team that we have. So we kind of take that very responsibly in how we build that out. But I think how we define that extra passion is that, the team we have is kind of a little old and gray. But having seen market cycles and things change, what we can see is where we might be in 5 or 10 years. And knowing that we're on the precipice of, if we can do this right, we're going to have such a positive impact in 5 or 10 years. It's that foresight of what we could potentially achieve that is really driving us right now. And as opposed to, oh, I just believe in this, or oh, this just makes money and it's my day job. Well, like this could become so important to the environment, to communities, and to the industry in 10 years. So I think it's really that belief that what we're doing is going to have a long-term impact.
Yeah. Do you think that this generational, my word, not yours, but this generational way of looking at impact and how we're using our time here, do you think this is going to be more of a front and center perspective as this world rapidly changes, over the next couple of decades?
It's a really tough question. You're asking some hard ones. I think that there's a goal, and there's being able to achieve that goal. And I truly believe that the free world, right, right now, sure, there's government incentives, but it's a capitalist world, and so we need to incentivize people in the right way to achieve those goals. And what I see going on right now in the world over the last 5 years is awareness, but not really incentive-driven mechanisms to achieve those. It's great to say, oh, we want to be net zero by X. And some people choose that, some people don't. A lot of companies, they have a duty to shareholders. So they can't be unprofitable in business to get to that goal. And so I think what we're going to see over the next 5 years, and you talk about a generational gap, younger people have goals and what they want to achieve, and the older people have the control on the companies that are doing that in a lot of way. And so there has to be that, I think, that merging that will come from, these are our goals, but also here's the incentive to achieve that goal, whether it's a punitive or a rewarding incentive. That's what needs to come over the next few years to affect that.
Do you think there's going to be more of a bridge between this intergenerational, exchange in general? Just in that, as you speak about how the more senior folks and experienced folks have a lot of the access to opportunity and capital, yet we're dealing with a lot of very new technology that is so, commonplace for our younger generations. Do you see there being a conduit there that's going to be leaned on more heavily?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I think that conduit happens generation to generation, and it's about education and I guess empathy, right? And being able to understand the other your person's point of view. The more passionate people are about things, the longer it takes for empathy to kick in about the other side. And so everything to me is like this kind of, even if you're moving in the same direction, right? There's an out of sync type process. So I think the younger generation is fantastic at setting their goals and being determined to get there. The older generations, and this was the same for me when I was younger, and they're more stubborn and set in their ways. And that bridge comes as education happens, because education then brings awareness that brings the empathy between the two and the goals that achieve it. I just think climate is, even though it's been around for 15 odd years, like this, it's really starting to come to that forefront now. And it's going to be a natural progression over the next 5+ years, I think, to bridge that gap, as you say.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I feel like every time we have another storm that's big, or anything that goes on, people are really starting to question how much it's related to the bigger unfolding. when it comes to your business and how you run it, I know in the past we touched on a little bit around how Bitcoin and crypto world is the Wild West. And so, how do you walk with integrity in that world? Because I know integrity is something that's very important to you as a value.
I mean, there's a few things to say. One is we always try and make the right decision. That involves turning a lot of deals down. And if we don't feel that the company or partner we're working with is coming from the right place, is everything legitimate, we'll just walk away before we even go into business with that person. That's often tough, and not in this particular space. But in Bitcoin in general, you see people who you would view as less qualified for business opportunities actually making a lot of money on that because they're not as they don't have quite as much integrity. But I think in the long term this will play out. And for me, and I think the rest of my team, we want to wake up. Something one of my first bosses said to me when I started in banking. He's like, you want to wake up every day and look in the mirror and be like, I'm proud of what I've achieved and done, and I made the right decisions, even if they didn't work out. And that's kind of how we approach it. And I would say, a particular industry right now, being on the oil field, it's hugely important. We got to show up. We've got, oil sites can be dangerous. We have to have health and safety in place. We have to be reliable. If people are, they have businesses and we just don't show up one day or turn our stuff off or, walk away or aren't there to be reliable, I mean, that's going to ruin our business long term. So we try and look at the long term picture, and we try and just make the right decision. It's very often clear what the right decision is, just not how to make it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. Have you experienced as an entrepreneur the challenge of drowning in opportunities?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a tough one because, especially if you have vision for the future, because there are so many opportunities and so many paths. And one of the things I've learned is very rare as an entrepreneur, you can execute anything on your own. The second thing is, even if you get people who believe in you and your idea, unless they're willing to put work in and execute parts themselves and you able to delegate to them, it still doesn't succeed because everybody takes a free option on you being successful, but you can't do it on your own. And so there's this issue. One of the things we do is every 2 weeks with my COO, we'll sit down and just say, okay, we could be doing 28 things right now. What's the one thing that we can focus on for the next 2 weeks that will move our business forward? And that, should we pursue this avenue? Should we pursue that? Should we tidy this up? And I think that's really helped us focus our current business. That, as an individual and an entrepreneur, the question might be, what would I focus on for the next year that I can really move forward? What business is it? What opportunity is it? Yeah, it's really about focus. At the end of the day, focus and execution.
But it sounds like you're doing it in both the lens of the long term and the short term, through these like 2-week kind of bite-sized bursts.
Yeah, and it's really, we know we'll come back to it, and we know we won't get the whole way there. But it's what would we really like to have right now that we can achieve in 2 weeks? If it's a 6-month project, probably get delayed until we might need to hire. But it's, well, how can we change our business for the better? And I think it's very much an entrepreneurial or a scaling thing, right? once you're a more established corporate entity, it's where do we need to be in 6 months, and what are the mechanisms to achieve that 6 to 12-month goal. When you're a new company and entrepreneurial, the focus has to be short, because the answer is everything, right? But what can you actually execute is different.
Yeah, and having that agile and adaptable nature. It reminds me of, do you ever hear the anecdote of like when NASA was back in the 80s deciding on their navigation system? They basically had two options. One was a navigation system that was like 99.9% correct from point A to the end destination. Then they had another option that course corrected every minute or so, and its accuracy was like, I think like, forget, these numbers aren't accurate, but say it was 50%, but it was having a course correction every minute, and it was able to adapt to the changes that were inherently happening. And as an entrepreneur, it seems that you're creating that value in your system and process.
Yeah, we hope so. And hey, it's good to feel successful, even if it's a small success, because that empowers you to do the next one. And I think what a lot of entrepreneurs come into is that climbing over that mountain is so vast that, they don't know how to get there. It's like if you do Kilimanjaro and you get to, there's the last day that's like an 8-hour hike up, and it seems impossible.
And it's on scree, right? So it's like every step you take, you slide back 3/4 of a step.
Slide of it. But you do it every one step at a time. And that's what you focus on, is getting to that next point, not getting to the top, right, for that last day. And I think entrepreneurship's the same way. Like, people dream of having a huge successful business with a lot of clients and a team of 50 people and lots of revenue. But then knowing how to get there and focusing on those little steps to get there is often what differentiates between success and failure.
And you sound like such a seasoned entrepreneur, but that's not actually the case, right? So can we hear about your journey to being an entrepreneur? Because it's, you have these amazing gems as an entrepreneur.
It's not where I started. I started in the corporate world. So I worked for banks and then for, corporate trading companies, and was involved in kind of some management and finance. And I thought about what I wanted to do for the next 20 years, and it wasn't being that kind of corporate politics anymore and go down that path. And so I sat around trying to find businesses and ideas and opportunities myself. And so it's been a huge learning experience. This wasn't the very first business that I've tried. I started with like 10 ideas, and you start to investigate, well, which one's going to work? Which one do other people believe in? Which one can I make progress in? And I think as long as you're willing to be honest and say, I can't achieve that. I need $1 billion worth of funding and 200 people. Like, that's not achievable for me in the next year, right? Versus this one and so you begin to narrow it down. And it's just, the last 4 years have been a huge learning experience, which is fantastic. You've just got to be honest with yourself and ask for advice, right? Although someone once told me, if you want investment, ask for advice. If you want advice, ask people for money. And then you get the honesty.
Oh, I like that. Did you experience, this is something I always experience when I'm exploring what like my next project's going to be. And I often have multiple ideas that I'm moving forward. Did you experience at some point where this one just took on a life force of its own almost? It's hard to describe, but it seems like it just becomes alive and starts attracting more of that attention from whoever's involved.
Yeah, actually, that's a really good way to describe it. And I think that's the business that we have now. It was one of those that 2 years ago, people were like, yeah, it's a great idea. And then 12 months, 8 months, and it takes forcing right in. And then you're right, at some point, it just takes off. Honestly, I think I just had a couple of meetings and a work trip back to Houston, which is where I spent 10 years. And I had a guy I used to know reach out and sat down, and he literally pitched our business back to me, from as an outsider. He's like, well, I think this is a really good idea, and all of these things. And I would just sat there going, it's really nice to have somebody pitch the idea to me that I've spent the last 2 years pitching to. And I think it's what you say. It's the information gets out, and then people start to want to be involved and want to work on it, and then can see that vision. And it's great to see that. Those people are the ones you want to hire, right? That have
Hmm.
the passion and the ability to do it. It's nice to get that. People should enjoy going to work.
Yeah, I mean, we're spending most of our waking hours doing it. And, I think we've really entered this day and age of purpose-driven work where for so many reasons, we need to feel that sense of drive and purpose through the impact of what we're doing. So it's, I think there's this consilience of time where it's really important to people.
Yeah, absolutely. What would you say is with your ventures and businesses, like, what's been the thing that makes you enjoy going to work and doing that? What drives you?
Ultimately, the relationships. It's the people I'm with and the connections that I have with them. That's why when you talk about, making sure you're having these shorter milestones so that you could celebrate little victories, I think those are all points when we could go into our own space and autonomously get something done, that coming back together and sharing either what we learned or accomplished, or even what we failed at and what we learned from that, that's really the thing that is that renewable energy. I mean, obviously, I feel like the passion, the idea is the price of admission. Then it's what's going to keep feeding that engine. And so, yeah, I think
Right.
it's those connections.
Yeah, it's great. That's interesting. But I think you're right. It's we've all got to feel fulfilled.
Yeah. So, is there anything that you see coming about in the company as a culture? Anything that you guys do to, celebrate or to share ideas, and just how you guys keep that excitement?
We're such a young company to have culture. Um, we we try and work it so that there's complete honesty. So we tell everyone, look, we don't mind mistakes, we don't mind things going wrong, as long as you tell us about them, right? It's that honesty culture. We can always adapt, change the business, redo things when there's a problem. And so we're really right now about, you know, because we're a small company, what is the honest thing to do? And that actually encourages people to question, because they feel like they're empowered to do that. And so we have new ideas coming in because people will they're thinking, well, what if we did that? What if we did it this way? What if we did it that way? And so there's a balance, I think, in a really good kind of, I guess, ownership of the idea and the path that people are looking for. In terms of little things we do to celebrate, we we try and get together just once every 3 months for a team dinner, a team something, and it's just relaxed. It's relaxed enjoyment, get to know each other. Um, We do have little little meetings and little cards that kind of get sent around, business card type things that get sent around. And I hope as our company grows and scales and we start to get 2 full-time offices as opposed to 1, we can have more of those things. But it's hard for an entrepreneur, I think a small entrepreneurial company to drive the culture, because it's so dependent on 6 people or 7. Every person adds different culture to that. When you got 30, 40, 50 people, you got to manage, you have to manage them all together. So we have nothing very cool that we do, just honestly trying to be honest with each other.
Yeah, well, hey, that's a big one. That's originally at university, you studied, I'm jumping all the way back. You studied as a theoretical physicist. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right.
So I have so many questions I could go there and ask, but one of the things I'm curious of is, do you see any things that you learned from that discipline that you apply to the work nowadays?
I think a lot of things. And we were talking about this briefly. My parents were teachers, and so they instilled this education and curiosity in me from a young age. I was always taught, my discipline was science, but I was always taught to question, and it's worked out well and not so well for me in certain circumstances. But the physics and physics is generally about using maths, or at least my version of physics, which is the theoretical side. It's about using maths to try and understand the universe. But in that process, you have to make assumptions. There's always a model, there's always an assumption, and understanding that assumption and where it goes right or wrong really determines the outcome of, if you're correct, if the hypothesis can be made to hold true. And so in business, especially with what we look at and do here, it's that same philosophy. It's educate, make a hypothesis, but then what are the assumptions? Like, what is important to the big picture from a financial perspective, like, and a non-financial perspective. So it's really that being able to question and being able to discern what are the important things about this business or this model, and are they going to hold true? And obviously it's a different thesis, but that's what I've kept through my career, is really trying to help focus that. That makes sense.
Yeah, totally.
I don't do integrals on the board or anything like that.
Right. No, but it gives me the Einstein quote of, just question everything. It's, that it's the way I experience that is the way to live in complete awe and curiosity of everything that's unfolding, which I think is very valuable, as a skill for an entrepreneur, for sure.
Yeah. And, going back to you talking about the Wild West in cryptocurrency, it is kind of, the BS radar that you have. That's part of that. Hey, does this make sense? Could this be true? Not blindly just believing, I think that's a huge, hugely important thing. There's a lot of investments that could have gone horribly wrong over the last 10 years, and miss out on some opportunity. But that questioning and that knowing, what are the assumptions, what's the crux of what people are saying here, and do I believe in that, is really important, especially in crypto.
Yeah. What's your take on like the meme coins and all of that?
There's a lot of market hype, and that's not to say that market hype is not valuable.
That kind of is the product, right? In a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's the product, and people will pay for it. and there's a lot of things that people will pay for and then will consistently increase in value. But I like to look at investment thesis and, where's the return, what will happen. So I think a lot of those coins is, they're nice. It's like a painting. You can spend some money on a painting and it's nice and you appreciate it and it's art, right? Doesn't mean it's worth anything or that you should put a business into that's a million times,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think a lot of those coins are that way. And look, people start those businesses off and raise those coins with good ideals. But it's like somebody starting a business. You wouldn't invest in every business with every good idea. You have to do research and due diligence. And you might love the idea and want them to succeed, but you're not going to go throw money at them, right? Or, invest your savings into some company that hasn't got a chance of succeeding. And so there's a lot of hype around that. And I think that sometimes the marketing in the industry doesn't have the trustworthiness or the responsibility that older industries have.
Yeah.
And that's where that questioning comes in, right? Don't just believe it. Don't just hope.
Right. Discernment, your research. And that's like the other side of the coin of a distributed network, which doesn't have a central communication that's necessarily coming out. And so it's, everything's got its own challenges.
Yeah.
So this one, I'm going to ask you to look into the crystal ball a little bit. If you look 10 years down the road, where do you see both the oil industry and the crypto world being?
Okay. So I think the oil industry will still be here. I think they're going to have to work very hard at new technologies that help curb pollution and emission. I think, that's going to come from the financing perspective on the back end with private equity, with funding. I think it's going to happen. I can see much higher oil prices because, what we talked about earlier with goals, we're going to miss a lot of the goals that are getting set. And so demand will be low. And hopefully that's a good thing in that there's less oil drilling, but the prices will be higher. And they should be because it should cost more to pollute the environment, right? Or to use carbon fuels, right? So I can see that higher prices will really incentivize, and I'm generalizing, right? Higher carbon allowance prices, higher carbon credit prices, higher oil prices. That's going to incentivize that kind of responsible, more efficient energy. I would love to see new technologies come out like fusion, but I think we're decades off actually that being the case. I'm sure they made great strides, but we're a ways off. I think in the crypto space, consolidation, is where we're going to go. And I think consolidation and regulation will allow for more adaptability. It's a little bit like the Wild West, right? If you look at the bull market from 3 or 4 years ago to now, it's so different in some ways and so similar in others. And I think in hard market cycles, so the crypto market has very fast market cycles. In a down cycle or a bear market cycle, you always get consolidation as a base to then push into the new, the new bull run. Blockchain is only good for certain things. It's not the solution to everything. So I think part of that consolidation is really figuring out where blockchain goes. Bitcoin, we believe in, and certain other ones like Ethereum and some of the smaller ones. And so I think they're here to stay. and they'll gradually become more and more adopted around the world.
Do you think they'll transition to being more of a currency than, a trading commodity?
I think Bitcoin is an asset class, right? It's got properties. Just as gold could be used as currency, Bitcoin could be used as currency. I don't think there are more suitable cryptocurrencies that have a high market cap that are very efficient that we might use instead of. I really like what some of the platforms are doing, like Celsius and Nexo, in that they're trying to distribute banking and assets together. So I think you could definitely see a move to those kinds of places where, Bitcoin might be held there and used as your asset, but one of the others is used as your currency for both for lending, for borrowing, and for transacting. I like that movement, to responsible parties like Celsius and Nexo. And so I it's like Amazon started by selling books, right? And we're like, does an online bookstore work?
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's morphed into something very different now, to where we don't even get out of our sofa to do the groceries or, get the Tide Pods.
Yeah.
And so it's about changing behavior. And honestly, the 10-year crystal ball, there's so much innovation out there. Who knows what will be able to change, the consumer behavior. I just think it is going to happen, and it is here to stay, and we'll figure that out as we go.
Well, Matt, thank you so much for taking time to have the conversation. Really amazing work that you're doing there, and I can't wait to see how it plays out.
Thanks, Brian. It's great talking to you.
Thanks for joining us this week on Growth Guide. A big thanks to our sponsors. This episode is sponsored by Project New You. I'm a huge fan of their Nitrovite nootropic brain supplement. It's helped me to develop laser focus, a better memory recall, and motivation. Nitrovite has helped me in launching this podcast amongst completing many other projects. Visit growthguide.love/focus to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. This episode is also sponsored by Morning Man. Live manly, own the morning. I learned about this from UFC champ Frank Shamrock. He was always having trouble getting started in the morning without like 7 or 8 cups of coffee. No exaggeration, I've seen this in person. So he created this product that's packed full of 45 superfoods, and it has 95 milligrams of clean caffeine, so you get that charge from the greens and also get a hit from the caffeine without feeling all jacked up. I'm definitely caffeine sensitive, and I like this product because it doesn't make me feel like I'm bouncing off the walls, but I feel sharp and energized to get shit done. Visit growthguide.love/morningman to learn more and use promo code GROWTH for 15% off. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Atmananda Yoga. You guys have got to check out their yoga alignment mat. I've been using this for a long time. As you know by now, I've studied and trained with them as a yoga teacher, and the mat is incredible to deepen your practice and to ensure a lifelong injury-free practice. Visit growthguide.love/alignment for more info or to buy. Be sure to use code GROWTH at checkout for 15% off. Make sure to visit our website, growthguide.love, where you can find freebies, exclusive content, and subscribe to the show so you'll never miss an episode. If you found value in listening, I'd really appreciate a rating on iTunes. I can't tell you just how important this is. Or spread the love. Tell your friends, your fam, heck, tell your spirit animals. And follow me on Instagram at growthguide.love. Be sure to tune in next week for our newest episode.